Hi everybody, welcome back to my watercolor channel. My name is Sarah and today I want to talk to you about a technique I use for painting stone walls and rock walls. I just got back from a trip to Europe where I went to Italy and Croatia, and I was so inspired by all of the buildings that I came across that were just so old, and I took 500,000 pictures. So I'm going to show you a couple of them to show you what I am going for in terms of that weathered rock look before I show you the tutorial. Here's a close-up of a building that I really loved in Venice. This kind of old weathered brick is so beautiful. There's a lot of color variation here. We have super light sandy colored brick all the way to this darker, like rusty colored. And so I think there's a lot of variation in color and texture to play with here. Here's a picture of our Airbnb in Croatia, and what I really love about these stones is how the grout is, I don't know if I'm using the right word, but the grout is lighter than the stones. It's almost white. So if I were going to paint this, I would use negative painting, where I would paint the stones and leave the grout around it, that white paper. Um, Instead of painting the grout itself, I would kind of be painting around it and getting that pretty cool effect. Here's the reference photo I'm actually going to be using. This is from Split, Croatia, and I actually circled the area that I'm going to be close up working with. So you can see in the middle here, this kind of square area of rocks. There's a lot of variation. It was a super sunny day, so we get to play around with a lot of shadows as well as those textures. So let's get started. In my sketchbook, I'm laying down water first because I'm going to be working wet and wet to get this background of colors all melded together. I'm actually just using two colors right now, which is going to be Moonglow, which is a neutral purple, and then Naples Reddish Yellow, which gives me kind of like that sandy color. I'm going to be dropping that into the wet paper and letting it mix and meld around. And so you get this background with no hard edges. This stage doesn't need to take super long. I'm putting color down darker than I actually want it to be because I know it's going to be drying about 15 to 20% lighter. All right, step one complete. You can see how much lighter it is now that it's dried. In the next step, I'm going to be adding texture to the background by using dry brush. So I'm going to pick up that purple from my palette, dab it off on my paper towel so that it is pretty dry. There's not a ton of liquid on my brush, and then I'm going to be dragging it across the paper so that the texture of the paper picks up the paint and gives this speckly effect. It's a good idea to play around with this effect on a piece of scrap paper so you can get comfortable with how dry you need your brush to be. Now that this is dry, I'm going to go in and add the lines for my rocks. If we look at the reference photo, we can see that these are kind of in lines. They're not the same shape and size. There's a lot of variation here. I'm going to be putting in pretty straight lines, but let my brush wobble a little bit to get that kind of organic, well, not organic because it's man-made, but you know what I mean. So I'm looking at my reference photo as I do this, and I'm trying to be pretty accurate and letting those shapes from the reference photo kind of guide where I put the different stones. All right. And already I think this looks pretty good. But the next step I'm going to show you, I really think takes it to the next level in terms of shape and texture and just getting that weathered effect. So this I'm going to show you on the other page. I'm going to be using something called Neurographic art, which then I'm going to apply to my stones. So with neurographic art, we put down lines that are intersecting. They can be wavy, they can be straight, it doesn't really matter, intersecting at random. And then we're going to be rounding out those intersections. So I follow this artist named Andrea Nelson, who's just a ray of sunshine. You should totally look her up. But when she does neurographic art, she says to take the V's of the intersections and turn them into U's. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm taking all of those intersections and those angles, those harsh angles, we're rounding them out into U's. And then they start to look like synapses or something. I don't know. It's a really great practice to do if you just need your brain to turn off. Just fill a whole sheet with this pattern and it ends up looking really cool. But I'm going to use that rounding off technique in my stones in just a second. So now it's time to apply. So where these stones intersect, I'm taking those V's, those angles, and I'm rounding them out into U's to suggest that these are old stones that are kind of worn down from age. And so there are these uneven gaps in the stones. I'm making these rounded out sections really small because I can always make them bigger later, but I can't really undo something once I've put it down. And I don't want these rocks kind of floating in the middle of a bunch of dark. As I'm putting this in already, I'm really liking the effect. I'm going to keep going with it, but I feel like it just kind of takes it off the page and makes it kind of match the vibe that I liked so much from these stones in Croatia. See how cute that looks? And then it's just a matter of adding in final shadows and individual textures on the rocks. When I'm adding in these final textures, I'm no longer looking at the reference photo. I'm kind of just adding stuff in with my heart and kind of seeing where I want to add definition or more variation. I'm using a combination of dry brush and kind of just glazing wet paint over. I'll add in a little bit of shadow on some of the rocks to suggest that they're kind of like sunken back a little bit, and then we'll call it done. I really need someone to permanently stand over my shoulder and tell me to stop fiddling. We are done. Yep, okay. Put the brush down. Okay. And there we go. So this was super fun. Nope. Put the brush down. Okay. She's still going. So this was super fun to do. I think another way this could be used is if you're painting a close up of animals and have like scales on reptiles or something like that. I think that would work really well. Um, but play around with this. I wasn't too precious on the colors that I was using, but the texture and final effect is something that I really liked. And if I were doing kind of a close up of this wall, I would definitely use this technique. If you try this technique or have any questions, let me know and have a wonderful day.